Well, we are slightly closer to an official announcement from both football clubs that Liam Manning will be departing Bristol City along with Chris Hogg and James Krause to join Norwich, and that is expected to come this weekend. And hopefully, the faster for Bristol City, the better. Obviously, Bristol City have been speaking to candidates already. I'd hope so, and we'll be talking about potential names that could be incoming to replace Liam Manning, and we'll be talking about one in particular who has since news has broken that he might well be interested in the vacant Bristol City role. The name we'll be focusing on in this video is former Luton, former Watford, former Forest Green Rovers manager Rob Edwards, who has been more and more heavily linked with the Bristol City job over the past sort of couple of days, and very recently just broke that he would be interested in taking over the soon-to-be vacant Ashton Gate position. And well, it makes a lot of sense, I think, from a lot of different angles. We'll start with a geographical angle. He's worked at Forest Green Rovers, obviously Gloucestershire, very nearby. He's worked in this part of the country before. And, there are myths about why would anyone want to take this Bristol City job. The Championship, if you don't get a parachute payment job, which is next season going to be Leicester, Southampton, Ipswich, you want one step below, and a team that's sort of upwardly mobile, pushing, and has positive momentum. Bristol City have most of that, and a pretty good squad to go with it as well, with some very talented players. So I think the myth that this is a job that not a lot of top managers will want is just that, it's a myth. And Rob Edwards definitely is a top manager, and I'm not really surprised that he would be interested in taking over. I'm sure you guys know a lot about Rob Edwards already because of his time in the Premier League and his extended spells in the Championship with Watford and with Luton. But we'll talk about his managerial career as a whole in this video. He started his sort of first team management at Forest Green in the start of the 21-22 season, where he took a Forest Green side that just finished 6th in League Two. There was an upward trajectory to that Forest Green side, though, and there was a bit of continuity with Edwards' appointment, but he really took them to a new level, and 84 points in his first season in management. An unbelievable footballing team with Kane Wilson, Nicky Cadden, Jamil Matty Stevens, some unbelievably good players for League Two at that time. And, did make hard work of it towards the end, but still they managed to win the league with 84 points, which does seem a bit low, but, still a really, really impressive job. And as a result of that, he gained a lot of traction and was probably one of the hottest names in English football. And if you were a team in the Championship or even at the top end of League One, you were looking at Rob Edwards as possibly, poaching from Forest Green, despite them getting promoted. And a lot of that team from Forest Green, Bristol City know all about that because Kane Wilson was taken and Ebbo Adams was taken, and I think Nicky Cadden was taken in that same summer as well. A lot of that team was picked apart a little bit, and that's all credit to Rob Edwards, and I think, and he gained a hell of a lot of praise, and ultimately he landed a very, very good job at the time in a parachute team in Watford. There's no doubt about it, he landed one of the best jobs in the Championship at the time. You definitely want a team, as I mentioned earlier in the season, if you're looking for a job in the Championship, you definitely want a team, especially at that point with the strength of Watford, with Ismail Assar, with João Pedro, with Hassan Kamara, some really strong Aspria, some really strong players in that Watford team who had also previously got promoted out of this division before. You wanted that job really if you were a manager looking for a job in the Championship. He definitely got one of the favourable jobs. He lasted 11 games at Watford, and with Watford, there's a lot of talk about managerial changes and how much of it is actually on the manager and how much of it is on the Pozzos. It's a bit of a balancing act when you're looking at managers who've just been sacked from Watford. We had a manager who'd just been sacked from Watford, and Nigel Pearson, a couple of manager appointments ago. So, look, how much ever you want to blame it on Rob Edwards, ultimately 3 wins in his opening 11 games. When you're a manager, you would kind of expect Gino Pozzo family to act pretty quickly and pretty ruthlessly, unfortunately. And we don't know what Rob Edwards would have done if he'd have got 25 games or 30 games in the Watford sort of head coach role. We don't know. There was a lot of transitioning going on. There's a lot of players leaving. There's still a hell of a lot of quality in that team, but ultimately it didn't work. And maybe wasn't the worst thing ever that he did get fired from Watford, because he landed a Luton job, and well, the rest is history, as they say. He landed the job of Watford's closest rivals, Luton Town, and well, what a job he did. Nathan Jones, who had left Luton at that point to go and manage Southampton up in the Premier League, had left them in a relatively decent position. They'd just finished in the playoffs the season before, accumulated a very good side under Nathan Jones, and it felt like they were again on an upward momentum, upward trajectory, similar to what he inherited at Forest Green in a little bit. And he did a fantastic job in taking that Luton team again to the next level. They finished third. They were a brilliant watch. They were really, really good. They were just a really top side, and uh, they navigated the playoffs so well. They went up to the Stadium of Light. They took the lead, and they they lost that first leg, but the second leg they were just brilliant. I mean, that Luton team was all shaped by Nathan Jones, pretty much, but he added a little bit more on top of it, layered, and just fine tuned it. And yeah, they were brilliant. They were brilliant watching. They're very much deserving of promotion. They got promoted via the playoffs, and won on penalties, sudden death on penalties against a very equally very good Coventry side at Wembley. That Luton side was very different from what the Forest Green side was like. So similar to Manning in a way, you can see that flexibility, that adaptability that Edwards has got. Maybe he's shown that he can definitely mould his style of play or his principles uh, around a squad, rather than going into a squad, tearing it all up, and then implementing his new style of play when that's probably not the best thing to do. So if he is to be appointed the next Bristol City manager, that adaptability, that flexibility that he's got, well, certainly will be tested at Bristol City, and that would definitely be very useful. We'll kind of gloss over the Premier League sort of journey he had. Definitely, incredibly emotional and an unbelievable ride. But teams going up from the Championship these days into the Premier League, it's so hard. Let alone, and I don't want to say, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way to Luton, let alone for a club the size of Luton, who have already got a sort of some financial disadvantage going into the Premier League, on top of the incredible disadvantage that literally anyone has going to the Premier League. Always going to be tough, but they were certainly the best out of the three newly promoted sides, and as a consequence, they were best out of the three relegated sides. They finished 13th, not 13th. They finished in 18th. I think they accumulated 28 points, which isn't a fantastic. They weren't really that close to surviving. There were points in the season where you thought maybe they could push, but still, despite that, Edwards gained a lot of plaudits. He was linked with quite a few jobs, and this certainly looked like a manager who, if they were to be relegated Luton back into the Championship, would be ready to be up there to the top end of the Championship. Football is funny and doesn't really work in ways you want it to, and for Luton, it certainly didn't. I'm no Luton fan, but a lot of the problems Luton had last season in their relegation probably rooted from that summer at the start of the season, where there were limited editions, some sort of high-profile signings in Victor Moses and Mark McGuinness for quite a lot of money, who has not been a bad signing. Lamine Dabo was brought in. Victor Moses said Tom Krause, Liam Walsh on a free transfer, who we know all about. There were some movement, and at that point, you're kind of going, there's a squad that's probably already well set up to go again. But then they lost also relatively decent amount of players: Andros Townsend, Gabriel Osho, Ogbene, obviously the big one, and Ross Barkley. So there were players who went out as well, and unfortunately, Luton didn't do enough, in my opinion, to replace them. And Edwards and Luton suffered as a result. A lot of the criticism thrown at Rob Edwards last season in the Championship was an inability to mix it up, and that stubbornness maybe to sticking to that style of play that just wasn't working. And Adebayo and Morris, who were so reliant in that style of play, just weren't working together anymore. And he tried different strikers and just didn't work. Jacob Brown, or towards the end of it, when Matt Bloomfield came in, Melanie Kelly and Nordas and stuff like that, it just didn't work. And maybe also a feeling of a lot of the players were shouldering the blame as well. So a lot of Luton's relegation to the League One obviously goes on Rob Edwards, because he's been there for a long time, but also a feeling of the players maybe down-tooled a little bit. last point on that on this season, the Championship for Luton. Rob Edwards, towards the back end, towards the end of his time at Luton, looked like a broken man. I mean, after that 5-1 defeat at Middlesbrough, I still remember watching that post-match interview, and he just looked completely broken. He looked like he was in a flood of tears inside, and he could just needed a hug. I mean, yeah, that psychologically is incredibly difficult to get over and to sort of go again. But if he's had enough of a break and if he's ready to go into a new project, well, certainly not saying no, I don't think. Just a summary on Rob Edwards. The style of football, very different in terms of his long stints at Forest Green and at Luton. I'm kind of slowly disregard the Watford one because Watford and didn't have a hell of a long time there. The football at Luton, very different to the football we saw at Forest Green. The football of Forest Green, if that was to come into if that was the football that he would play, brilliant, absolutely fantastic. If the football at Luton is the football he's going to try and implement here, I'm less keen. But he's certainly shown adaptability. He's shown flexibility. He's shown an ability to sort of change his style of play depending on the squad he's inherited. And that is a major characteristic, and that's a characteristic shared with Liam Manning as well, and ultimately a characteristic that got us into the top 6, I think. He's not not completely set on a system. There was, calls for stubbornness and stuff like that sort of criticism aimed at him back end of his time at Luton. But maybe a fresh start, maybe a fresh sort of environment that might change, and we see a little bit more from him. He's still a young manager. I think he's still 42, so he's still learning, and he's still sort of. And I know that sounds a little bit, maybe a little bit ridiculous because we have a lot of young managers in their 30s in the Championship and in the EFL in general. He's still a young manager. He's still learning, and ultimately that experience at Luton towards the back end of his time there can only have done him good. So if he was to come in, I'd be excited. I'd be drawn to it. He's obviously got a promotion on his CV. He was the manager that took Luton to the Premier League. He was the manager that sort of finished the job at Luton. He's got 2 promotions on his CV, actually, thinking about it. One from the Championship, obviously. He's got experience in the Premier League. He's a very experienced manager, and I think would be a very nice fit for Bristol City in terms of what we want, in terms of continuity to Liam Manning, instead of, rather than a revolution, maybe more of an evolution. And I think Rob Edwards definitely fit that bill. And obviously, the elephant in the room, the major point is that he's a very handsome man. I mean, Christ, you just have to look at some of the post-match interviews and some of the social media numbers that Luton were generating in the Premier League when his face was anywhere on their Twitter and stuff. It was rather unbelievable. So that's a major plus, obviously. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Let me know your thoughts on Rob Edwards being linked to the Bristol City job. What you think of him maybe being the new Bristol City manager, and what he could potentially bring to Ashton Gate as well. Is that an appointment you'd like to see? Let me know down in the comment section below. Like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel for more Bristol City content in maybe the next few days. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. Keep safe, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.